And we are live. Hello, Year 11, Mr. Falali here. If you couldn't tell from my lovely and, quite frankly, rather soulful and melodic voice, I am going to be giving you a quick roundup of My Last Duchess by Robert Browning, as you should know at this point. If you don't, I'm concerned. This is one of the poems in the AQA Power and Conflict anthology. I'm going to give you a plot summary. I'm going to give you some points that you can make on structure of the poem. Also, I'm going to give you some key quotations to know. And I'm going to, crucially, show you how you can compare it to Ozymandias. Okay, so plot summary. My Last Duchess is a mysterious, dramatic monologue. It's what we call a dramatic monologue. Full zoom. A dramatic monologue, as you can see, is a poem that is in the form of a speech or a narrative by an imagined person. And generally what you tend to find in dramatic monologues is that throughout the poem, more and more is revealed about the speaker. The speaker, in this instance, being an Italian Duke of Ferrara. The Duke is showing off a portrait of his late wife to a visitor, a representative of his future wife, and as the Duke reminisces on their lives together, he ends up telling the visitor more than he realises. He presents his last wife as being flirtatious and unappreciative, which is actually something that we're going to come on to in a bit more detail later. The poem takes a sinister tone, however, when the Duke alludes to having murdered his last wife. If you allude to something, you aren't explicitly saying that you've done something, but an allusion is a suggestion about something. So the Duke alludes to having murdered his last wife. Zoom in. The Duke shows his power and dominance over his wife throughout the poem. Now, that is a very brief plot summary. That's sort of what happens in the poem. I've promised Miss Hendra I'll try and get this done in 5 minutes. I've got 3 more to play with. I'm feeling confident. I want to give you an idea of some structural comments you can make about the poem. So, My Last Duchess uses iambic pentameter, which, generally speaking, is regarded as being a very natural way of speaking. It has been suggested, although I'm not sure proven, that often in typical conversation we speak in iambic pentameter. So it helps the poem to feel more conversational, as though the Duke of Ferrara is actually speaking to someone. The poem also features rhymed couplets, which are pairs of, very creative way of written rhymed there, not because I forgot to add the H, just because I thought it would look quite cool, pairs of rhymed lines that occur together. The rhymed couplets help to make the Duke's speech more controlled. Now, even though his thoughts and sentences are untidy, the addition of rhymed couplets help to create some sense of a seemingness of control in the Duke's speech. Now, that's important because the Duke's structure of speech helps to illustrate the Duke's controlling nature. And of course, control equals power, which is going to be one of those key words in the Power and Conflict anthology. Browning uses enjambment throughout the poem, which is the continuation of a sentence without a pause beyond the end line, couplet or stanza. Now this helps the flow of the Duke's speech. It helps it appear more, full team, conversational. Key quotations. You are, of course, going to need to know some key quotations for the poem. I've highlighted 4 that are very, very useful. I've also given you rather, I think we can all agree, delightful images. Now, for those of you who I've taught, I think you can appreciate, both with my handwriting and my images, that this has taken me a very long time, because normally my handwriting looks like sort of a 12-year-old boy's written it. Now it looks like a 15-year-old boy's written it, maybe even a 15-year-old girl. So I'm quite pleased. Number 1. Both used within the poem and the title of the poem, My Last Duchess. Now, this is important for many reasons. The pronoun my is in itself very revealing. Of course, my suggests ownership, and this is a theme that we see throughout the poem. It's as though the Duke wanted to have his wife as a possession. Okay, he presents his wife as a possession. The Duke wanted to dominate her. Okay, and this is one of the key themes that we will come back to. Number 2. The quotation, her looks went everywhere. Her looks went everywhere. When the Duke says this, the reader starts to get a little bit of more sense of why this initial wife was his last wife, his last Duchess, and not his current Duchess. We get the sense that something's happened to her throughout the poem, and it starts to become revealed when he says that her looks went everywhere. This reveals the Duke's jealousy. We learn that his wife did not provide the Duke with her total attention. And the theme that this touches upon is that it highlights the dominance of men over women, the power of men exercised over women. Number 3, my gift of 900 years old name. Now, this is revealing in many ways. First and foremost, his wife failed to recognize the Duke's power. We're coming back to that word power over and over. Also, the noun gift is very important. It reveals the extent to which the Duke believed that his wife should have been grateful for their marriage. It seems as though she was rather ungrateful. Of course, quotation number 2, her looks went everywhere, suggests that perhaps his wife, the Duchess, was being quite flirtatious with other people, not giving the Duke his full attention. Her full attention, I should say. 5 minutes 43. I'm going to do this in 1 more minute. I'm sorry, Miss Hendra. 6 minutes isn't bad. It's going to be 7. I'm wasting time. Number 4. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. Now, this is where the poem does start to strike a far more sinister tone, because, again, there's the illusion here. I gave commands, and then all smiles stopped together, that actually the Duke may have used his power that he had over his wife to have her murdered, so it's led to her demise. The fact that she was unwilling to be controlled by her husband, that she appeared to be flirtatious and perhaps a bit more liberated and outgoing and free than he wanted, because he wasn't able to exercise his power over his wife, he's used his power to at least have her murdered. So, links to Ozymandias. Thinking about those comparisons that you're going to need to make in your section B of your lit paper 2. So, both poems explore man's attempt to dominate the world around them. In Ozymandias, Ramses II aimed to dominate his people and the natural world, whereas in My Last Duchess, the Duke dominated his wife. Ozymandias explores nature's power over man. My Last Duchess explores man's power over women. In terms of similarities, both poems focus on the finite nature of man. Now, finite, I've defined, it means limited in size or extent. Man being finite essentially means everyone is going to die. Both poems focus on the finite nature of man. Both poems touch upon death. In Ozymandias, man's finite nature means that nature will always be more powerful. I mean, that's one of the underlying messages of the poem. It's that ultimately man will never have power over nature because man is finite. Whereas in My Last Duchess, the woman's demise highlights how powerful the Duke is and how powerless she was. So in many ways, you could argue that My Last Duchess touches on a death. But in that poem, it's the wife's death which highlights the power of man. Whereas in Ozymandias, Ramses attempted to have power, but his death highlights the powerless nature of man, or the power of nature over man. In terms of differences, My Last Duchess essentially illustrates the fact that man can have power over women. Ozymandias focuses on the idea that actually man has no power and that nature has all of the power. I do appreciate I've said power many, many times, Year 11, but ultimately it is the Power and Conflict anthology, and I hope that has been in some way helpful. Even if it hasn't been particularly useful to you, at least it will have helped you go to sleep. So think of it as a nice soothing audiobook. That said, the last sort of 20 seconds of this video, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if Miss Hendra deleted, because it's ultimately not particularly helpful. All the best of luck, Year 11. Not that you need it. Not that you need it. You have these delightful A3 slides. They're not really slides, are they? Now I am whittering, and I will go. This is me signing off. Mr. Falali signing off. In 3, 2, 1, and signing off.